You have questions, we have answers. This is Jane Miller.
And this is Ken Miller. Welcome to our show, all about real estate with Ken and Jane. So this show, we're going to talk about the differences between residential and commercial transactions. And we're going to break it down and talk about the differences in the contract, the closing timelines, the inspections. They're similar. They both involve real estate, but there's a lot of differences and a lot more. I think in general, commercial transactions tend to be more complicated, tend to be lengthier, and they can drag out a lot more. Not that residential transactions can't drag out, but
it's much simpler.
It's much simpler.
Ken, today's show is more about the commercial because we did similar things in the past about residential. I mean, 16 years ago, almost 17 years now, when I got my license, actually at the beginning, I feel I'm more suitable for the commercial agent rather than residential because I used to be a bank manager managing large portfolio. I run a business. So I know the business side probably more like my strength than the residential, right? But when I really get into it, I had a training spec because I used to work for a company that time. They have to require do a special training before you can do the commercial. So me and my best buddy, Caroline, we got our certificate. Caroline always laughed, right, during the exam, right? Caroline got out first. She's so fast. She got out first. I got out later. She was waiting for me. Oh, my God, how long take her to do it? And when I handed in my exam paper, I remember the director of the commercial said, oh, your Chinese have to get everything correct. Can't you just make a mistake or something? At the end, I can't remember. I think like only 2 of us passed the first short, maybe a few more. I'm not sure, but 2 of us passed. No worries because purely math, purely math and exams. So we both get out of quick, and we had a nice lunch because we finished much earlier than everybody else. So, but that's a side story. Yeah. But once we got that, we can start do the commercial, and I realized it's not as easy as you think because unlike residential. You don't have a central website to know all the inventories, even though you have a CoStar, you have LoopNet. But a lot of time it's through the relationship and the circles, right? Yeah. You really it's very different. So I did very few commercial, and then. But I decided to focus on residential because
and with commercial we're going to break it down, but there's a lot involved because like when somebody with residential, when somebody comes to you and they want a house, they tell you to look the neighborhood they want, the towns they want. It's a single family house or they want a 2-family house, but let's assume it's a single family house. Pretty much anywhere you look that's suitable, that's a single-family house that'll work for them. With commercial, it's more complicated because they want to open a dry cleaning business, they want to open a nail salon, they want to open,
bagel shop,
an events planning thing. It's much more complicated because you've got to find locations they want, then you've got to check for conflicts with tenants, and you've got to make sure the zoning works, the parking works.
I know.
There's a lot of things.
Karen and I drove a lot of places, looking for the coffee shop.
If they want to do a warehouse, they want to do industrial, they want to do light manufacturing. Does it work for, you can look at warehouses, you have to look at the code and see if they allow, if they want to make, they want to make food processing. I've worked with all different clients. It's very, very complicated because there's so many things you have to juggle and to find the right spot. Then you have to get into the particulars. Is the ceiling height work? Do they need a loading dock? Do they need a drive-in? So there's so many things that go involved in any type of commercial transaction.
Absolutely.
But so let's start talking about the whole process. If you do find something in terms of the offer process in residential, I'll let you embellish this. In residential, the realtors start off with a realtor, a New Jersey Association of Realtor pre-printed contract that the realtors are allowed to complete. That basically they fill in the blanks for the contract price, closing date, deposit amount, mortgage commitment due date. There's, a lot of, all the standardized paragraphs are in there. Then there's an additional provisions section where they can write in additional provisions. So that forms the basis. You start off with a contract, and then that contract is given is given to the attorneys, and then they're to start their attorney review, which a lot of clients from out of state may be confused by because they think, well, wait a minute, I don't want to sign any type of contract until my attorney looks at it. But in New Jersey, that's the contrary. The contrary. That's a start point where the attorneys won't look at it unless the realtor contract is signed,
fully
executed, and delivered to both sides have it. And we're going to talk about attorney review. You want to add anything to that before I talk about the commercial?
No, go commercial.
So in commercial, you have something, you do an offer. You don't do it. There's no the attorneys prepare the contract. But in commercial, if a party is interested in buying something or leasing something, the commercial agent will prepare what's called a letter of intent. A letter of intent is an offer which outlines the economic terms of the offer, the name of the party, the name of the type proposed business, proposed use, size and description of the space, the price, deposit if it's a purchase, the closing date, and most importantly, the due diligence. What type of due diligence they need to do on the property, which would most likely be physical inspections of the mechanical, electrical, all the major structural things, as well as a environmental due diligence, which comes into play. And we're going to talk about that in more detail later. But you're going to outline all that, also subject to being contingent upon the proposed use being allowed by zoning. That's something you want to have in every letter of intent and most likely in every contract, because you always want to have that to protect your client if you represent them. You don't want to put them in a situation where the zoning isn't going to work, even though you try to verify that in advance of going forward. There's different ways, different towns, you can apply for like a letter of intent, a letter of interpretation, where you can file usually a nominal fee, and the town will run it through their zoning to make sure there's no conflicts. But you still don't want to, give away your zoning rights.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the difference.
Before you start here, Ken, I want to add one thing. In the residential real estate, very rare, but I do see some agent put a letter of intent, okay? Which is, if you're doing for multiple family or something, I understand a little bit more complicated, right? But street, just simple single family, sometimes the agent just I don't know, they just don't want to be bothered. I mean, they give you a letter of intent. I feel in the residential field, right, only take you like 20 minutes to do the pre-printed offer. Okay, so if you don't even want to invest your time, you think, oh, my buyer, who knows, the multiple offer, I don't think we get it. Why to waste my time? I mean, that's really doesn't shine good on your offer. You should really take it only take us about 15, quicker one, probably 10 minutes. But for me, maybe 15, 20 minutes because I'm older type, harder, right? So to do one, why not? And also, if you do letter of intent in the residential, because a lot of buyer could be first-time home buyer. When you put on a contract, they may have a lot of questions later. It's defeat the purpose. And then the residential goes so fast, it's still very competitive market for the good housing. By the time you put a letter of intent, first of all, the seller don't think you're serious if they did. And by the time you write a contract, get a buyer sign, go back to seller, you easily lose a few hours to a few days. And in the meantime, you could lose the house already, right? Yeah. So I would highly, highly recommend it, the buyer agent for residential, please take 15, 20 minutes to write actual offer, make you explain to your buyer the terms and let them sign it. And rather than just save them time, it's our job, right? Regardless, the buyer may offer $50,000 lower. You think, oh my God, crazy, $50,000 lower, you're not gonna get a shot. But it is our job to service our client. If your job is service your client, you definitely have the 10, 15, 20 minutes just to do a, fully printed. It's pretty much prepared. You just put a name, address, and everything else, and put in there. Let your buyer sign it because letter of intent normally doesn't sign by the client, right? So the commercial one is different because the business owner more experienced. Right. But a residential, how do you know later on the buyer disagree? Yeah. The term in there, so they didn't sign. So I would say you should, in terms of to present your client's offer better, professionally, you should do actual offer, not a letter of intent for simple
because
residential
because the realtor pre-printed form has the key terms in it, has the closing date, the deposit amounts for the first deposit, second deposit, if applicable, the mortgage, the percentage of the mortgage.
There's not much to fill in.
There's not much to fill in. It could take, like you said, 10 to 15 minutes.
I mean, if you type up a letter of credit, it's the same thing, letter of intent.
And then to move forward, you would need that contract anyway. So you're almost doing double work. If you don't, if you go to the letter of intent first for residential and then go back and have to do the contract,
Sometimes I see the agent does that. First of all, they feel the buyer offer may be too low. They don't want to be bothered.
But they want to put something in writing.
Yeah, but the buyer want to put in writing. They want to put in writing. Or even worse, they call me up and give me verbal. I said, I don't take verbal. You have to put in writing. 2 minutes later, a text on my, on the phone, or, like letter of intent, but it's a text. My client want to offer X. Can you ask the seller to accept
that's
it?
Not. That's
no.
not. That's because you don't. Letter X. It's like shooting a bullet in the dark.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know the X is what is the buyer's qualifications. Do they have a pre-qual? Yeah. What do they want to do?
So that's why I said you should in the commercial. It's a standard. You do
everything in writing. Yeah. Let's get back to the commercial. So the letter of intent in commercial, it normally would. It's nice to have it signed by both parties. However, one of the things you put in the letter of intent, which is implied, is that it's non-binding. So, but it's just a good faith offer, and it can be revoked. And the only way, but then from commercial, what they do is the attorneys rely on the depth of the letter of intent that has the basic nuts and bolts, and they draft the contract. So the commercial contract is drafted from scratch. The attorneys, it could take a week to months. I've had contracts that have dragged for months and months because due to attorney terms and getting the ironing out all the details. They're very, very involved. So it's unlike residential, where you've got the attorney review process. Once again, the attorneys, once the realtor contract is fully signed and delivered to both the buyer and the seller, then you have a 3-day period from which to get an attorney to review it and disapprove of it and make modifications. That's just that 3-day doesn't mean that the review will be done within the 3 days. It just means that either it must start within those 3 business days from the date that the contract is delivered to the buyer and the seller. When they have a fully signed copy in their hands. And that can take anywhere from a couple days to a week, or again, it could be longer depending on the attorneys involved and their schedules
but
and
much
demands,
simpler compared with the commercial.
It's much simpler, right?
Straightforward.
And usually with the residential contract, you have the baseline realtor contract, and then you have a series of attorney review letters or addendums that are piggyback off the residential contract and make changes and modifications to the paragraphs of the realtor contract, and that forms the contract. When you take the realtor contract together with the attorney review letters, or with sometimes they agree on an addendum and they put everything. It all depends how the attorneys operate, but and normally that would be signed by the buyer and the seller, or the attorney, if the attorney has the express written authorization to sign on behalf of their client. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll continue right after these messages. Okay, welcome back. So let's finish up talking about the contract review. So again, with residential contracts, once the attorneys sign off or the clients sign off on it, then the contract becomes binding. In commercial, again, you don't have a contract at the beginning. So the contract, when it's all done, whether that's in a few weeks or it's in a few months, whatever that 20-page, 40-page, 50-page document is, that's got all the agreed upon changes in it. So you have one document. That's the binding contract. So that's a big difference, and that's going to have paragraphs on the zoning. It's going to have paragraphs on the due diligence, and we're going to talk more about. We're going to get into now the due diligence, and that's another difference. So the due diligence, in essence, is the inspection or the inspections, right? So for residential contracts, the due diligence is much shorter time period. It typically might be from 10 days to 14 days, or 5 days to 14 days.
Yeah,
and you want to talk about what is the residential due diligence?
That's the home inspector inspect, and then you can sit down with your agent, attorney, to put what's important, to ask for it. The seller can either repair or give credit or do nothing. So that's that's really depends on each transaction, how much you get, what's the market, so on and so forth. But I think, once again, today's show should be focusing
So let's talk. But I just want to give the listeners a base reminder that the home inspection will consist. You'll have a home inspector go out there. They'll test look at the roof, the HVAC, the electrical, mechanical, structural. They'll do some environmental testing from it for radon, look at if there's
tank.
mold, and maybe do an oil tank sweep, maybe do a sewer scope.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
but that's usually all done within 7 to 14 days.
Yes.
Or wood destroying insects.
Yes.
That's
Yep.
another facet. So with commercial, you're going to do all the building inspections of the property you're buying. But in addition, most likely you're going to do an in-depth environmental inspection known as a Phase 1 environmental site assessment. So the Phase 1 environmental site assessment, you're going to hire a environmental professional. They're going to do an historical records review of all the prior usage of the property. They're going to acquire that. They're going to look at aerial photos from the historical aerial photos. They're going to give indications of what was previously occupied on that land. You're going to look at an environmental database reported of all surrounding environmental, reported leaking underground storage tanks, different uses that could impact the property. Then they're also going to do an on-site inspection where they're going to interview the owner and the operators and do a thorough walkthrough to identify any potential areas of environmental concern. Mm-hmm. So that report, normally the Phase 1 in and of itself, can take at least 30 days to complete.
But once again, I want to alert the listeners out there, right? And you have to hire professional, experienced attorney and agent, okay? Because sometimes especially like you mentioned, right, the deal is very complicated, complex. So a lot of residential agent and residential attorney, or the attorney does everything, they may not have that depth understanding and the experience to protect you. For example, right, I just had a friend call me. Their friend bought a industrial land. Okay, so but the agent recommend them a attorney that's a residential, mm-hmm. and some commercial basic. If you buy a office space or something, industrial totally different. So they asked me whether because you used to be attorney, right? They asked me whether you can represent them. I said no, can doesn't do the attorney anymore. He's a licensed real commercial agent now. So, but I recommend a very good land use expert. Mm-hmm. To represent them. So that's very important because sometimes, it's not your attorney doesn't care. It's he or she may not have the experience or knowledge to think.
And to put what needs to go into the contract.
Yeah, that's right.
So to piggyback off that, so the Phase 1 may not be the end all, because that's why the due diligence for commercial transactions can take anywhere from 90 days to maybe 120 days because depending on the Phase 1 results, if they have recognized environmental concerns, the Phase 1 consulting firm would recommend a Phase 2 environmental site assessment. And a Phase 2 involves actually collecting physical samples, usually of the soil, could be of the building if there's some areas of the building that have suspect materials they want to analyze. But let's just focus on the environmental. The soil, maybe the groundwater, and that's going to drag it on. And that's why the attorney has to be experienced in whoever represents them in the contract. You have to make sure that that's all specified in there, that they have the right to do that. Yeah. And normally the seller will push back and say it's up to, they don't give them carte blanche. They want to be able to, have a say, because then it's very complicated, because then there could be certain reporting requirements that could be triggered. That's why whomever does the Phase 2 has to be, if they're an LSRP, they have a certain reporting obligation. So you have to be very careful. It's a very sensitive topic, and it's
Isn't it a few months ago we had a show, we invited the Peak Environmental, they talk about it. This, from that, what I gathered, they have to do certain the testing. So in the future, God forbid, even anything happen, you kind of would be was that
that you're talking that's a Phase 1. Basically, that gets into the more legalities.
I'm confused already.
But you have to basically, if you're ordering the Phase 1, you want to make sure, this is a tip. You want to make sure if you're a buyer out there buying an industrial or commercial property, you want to make sure that you have the rights to rely on that Phase 1. That it's not ordered by the lender or a third party, because you want to take advantage of what's called the innocent purchaser defense.
Yes,
that's very important. That's the legal protection you get. So that's why you have to make sure that you have the rights, that you can rely on that report. Yeah. So you're protected by that.
Once again, only your experienced real estate agent, commercial agent, and your very experienced commercial attorney and the environmental company you hire knows how to protect you. So just you have to be very careful. Like this time, they just bought industrial land, and farm agent normally that's residential. And then, but the friend said, hang on a minute. They want a lawyer. They say, oh, Jane's husband. So I said, no. Ken doesn't doubt that. But now you have a more problem because, you need a good lawyer to write a right contract to protect all your rights. And that's industrial land. Based on the knowledge I hear you on the phone, I know it's much more complicated. I said, no, you better do all these phase one, plus possible phase two.
And these drag out. We have a deal that's gone on for almost a year now, and they're just getting to the phase two right now because the contract took months to finalize, and then then with the weather impacts, it took a while to get the phase one done, and now we're wrestling on the phase two and how that's going to work out. So it's so they're lengthy, very lengthy and very complicated,
involved too.
Very involved,
very complex and involved,
right? So we spoke on that. So. And then the phase two would be it would be necessary almost always if it's recommended, because normally these transactions have lenders involved, and the lenders and the commercial lenders will look carefully at the phase one results, and they're going to err on the side. If there's any recommendation for phase two, that will be needed if you want to involve a third party lender, because they're going to go strictly with what the phase one findings are. And a lot of times they may err on the side of caution or be conservative, but you have to do it. You have to do it, otherwise the deal won't go forward.
To be honest with you, I think, even for the buyer, even you have a cash, right? Don't you want to protect yourself? You don't want 10, 20, 30 years later, you end up with this a huge problem, and because you were not careful enough. So that's why I rather, with a commercial, I rather lose the opportunity than end up with the unlimited liability. With the single family, the risk is much limited. As long as structure is fine.
The single family, your scope of environmental might be limited to doing an oil tank.
Yeah, that's it.
Just to make sure, because historically there could have been oil tanks in the ground base of the heating source was maybe in the 50s or depending, but you can find out a lot from the, But also with the phase one, which I neglected to mention, is besides tapping into the databases, you're also going to do the OPRA request, which is very important on both ends.
We do both the OPRA requests for the residential.
You can find out a lot about residential. You can find out a lot about buildings, about the history, just by doing an Open Public Records Act request to the municipality. That's very important. That's something that's done as part of the phase one, as well as reviewing the database, the fire maps, the aerials, the on-site.
So, with the commercial and the residential, right? With the residential, I always tell client, worst scenario, right? The place has redone. Okay,
but that's
based on the square footage, you probably end up with about 2,000 to 2,500. Okay, that's really not a huge risk, right? But with the oil tank, can be from 5,000 to 150,000. So that's a big no-no. So that's why you have to get it done. But with a commercial, it's much more. If you bought something contaminated, going to cost you a fortune
and you're
to clean it up.
And these commercial deals, you're talking millions of dollars for industrial land. So you want to make sure that you're investing heavily, and the lenders are investing heavily, so they want to make certain that it's...
They not only they lose money on this purchase, they always open up very much potential liability, right? You're the last one, you have to clean up. It could cost you maybe twice or 10 times more than your purchase price. So you have to really understand what you sign up for. So that's that's a worry, that you have to have all the knowledge and the skill and hire the right people to give you advice. It's more important.
Crucial part. So the due diligence it could go on from 90 days to 200, depending on how long, depending on what ensues with the phase one report and what phase two, and then you could have post phase two discussions. Maybe there's spot remediation that can be dealt with, or there's different stages. It may be a minor issue, it could be a medium size, or it could be a major deal breaker. So you just don't know, and without having the sampling results and the borings done. So let's switch now to financing structure. That's also something that's different between residential and commercial. In residential, you can talk about it when you're looking at the financial structure. You're looking at the
down payment,
the buyer. But
credit,
I'm talking about the buyer.
job.
You're right. You're looking at the buyer's down payment, the credit, job? Are they, 1099 or
Yeah.
W-2? Income, of course, interviewing the lender.
Yeah.
And what their job stability you're trying to evaluate as best as you can if you're the
Yeah.
seller's agent, right? You're looking
or even a buyer agent issue. I mean, obviously for the Privacy Act, they can't tell you too much, but by just have a simple chat with them, so you gather a lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I as a listing agent, I always ask for a buyer agent or buyer to provide a bank statement to show their down payment and the closing costs. So
Right.
and you'll find out a lot about that.
Right, and
because-
the cash component of the purchase price. You want
Yes,
to make sure that they've
the
got
down
the funds,
payment
down
and
payment and closing
closing
costs.
costs. Yeah, if you
So-
want to pay cash, I want to say the full
amount,
amount is
of course.
available. Not like you have to, close the deal in China and wire the money here.
Yeah,
That's not
or
gonna, it happened before.
Or
It happened
is it
before.
liquid or is it not
Yeah,
liquid?
not
And there's-
liquid. Some
but-
people may give you a bank statement, which is the 401k, and for a lot of
that can be volatile.
people. Yeah,
But-
not only volatile can. And it's certain if you're 40 years old, you're probably only allowed to draw up to 50%, not 100% of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a penalty later. So we have to understand, how much if you offer a house 800,000 and you give me $1 million retirement fund, I know the maximum is maybe 500,000. I'm looking for the balance, right? If you want to pay cash. So you have to really ask the question. But for the residential, it's much more simpler.
Right. Now,
Yeah.
for the commercial, if it's an owner user that's going to buy it, a lot of those same similar scenarios will apply. The lenders will look at the personal finances, the business history, the tax returns of the business, credit scores, how much they're putting down. Normally with commercial, they need at least 25 to 30% down. But let's talk about the other scenario. If you're buying an investment property, an income-producing property, they're also going to look at the performance portfolio of that property. What is the net operating income? And they're going to, which is basically the net revenue, the gross revenue minus the operating expenses gives you the net operating income. Just remember that. And then they're going to look at that divided the ratio of the net operating income over what your annual debt is. That's called what the DSR is, debt to service coverage ratio. And they want to make sure that that you're making enough that the ratio is sufficient for each lender.
Yes.
So there's enough money coming in to cover the mortgage and then give you a
Yep.
little bit of a cushion. And that might be a 1.2, 1.1. Every different lenders have different things on that. So that's another difference. And it's usually the mortgage process is more involved because they're looking
Yes.
really carefully at the business portfolio, the type of business, and the appraisal comes into play in both scenarios. So that's something similar. So, and then the last thing, we're just almost out of time, but there's another way when they look at the appraisals. There's a sales comparable approach that they look at like properties, which is similar in commercial and residential. But in commercial properties, they look at the income approach. They look at the net operating income again and divide it by the cap rate to estimate what the property's value is. If they want a 6% cap rate, if you're at a 200,000 net operating income, that would give you a value. So we don't have time to get into that, but that's just another way that they often look at it, the capitalization approach to evaluating a property.
I think that's almost similar to residential. If you buy a apartment building or you buy a multi-family home, you have to, just purely investment property, you still have to see the return, right?
The return is the way to put it.
You compare with the rent. That's a similar, but yeah.
All right, we're out of time. We hope you guys enjoyed the show. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.